Have you ever been separated from someone you love and wondered if you'd ever see them again? Have you ever felt the crushing weight of guilt for something you did years ago, only to have that moment come back to haunt you when you least expected it? What if I told you that one of the most powerful stories of forgiveness, redemption, and divine purpose in all of history began with a dream that seemed impossible? A dream that led to betrayal, slavery, false accusation, and years of silence. But then, in a moment no one saw coming, that very same dream became the key to saving an entire nation from starvation. This is the story of Joseph, a man who was sold into slavery by his own brothers, forgotten in a prison cell, and then raised to become the second most powerful ruler in Egypt. And just when you think the story couldn't get more intense, his brothers, the very ones who betrayed him, stood before him begging for food, not knowing who he really was. Can you imagine the emotions running through Joseph's heart at that moment? The power he held, the justice he could demand, the revenge that was within his grasp. What would you do if you were in his position? But here's where it gets absolutely stunning. Joseph didn't respond the way we would expect. Instead, he orchestrated a series of events so profound, so emotionally charged, that when the final revelation came, it shattered everyone in the room. This isn't just a story about forgiveness. It's a story about how God weaves together pain, betrayal, and suffering into a masterpiece of redemption that no human mind could have designed. And by the end of this video, you're going to see how every painful moment in Joseph's life was preparing him for this exact encounter. Drop a 777 in the comments if you're ready to witness one of the most emotional reunions ever recorded. And trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless. Years had passed since Joseph last saw his family. He had been a teenager when his brothers threw him into a pit and sold him to merchants heading toward Egypt. Now he was a man in his 30s, dressed in royal Egyptian garments, wearing the signet ring of Pharaoh himself, commanding the entire food supply of the greatest empire on earth. His appearance had changed. His language had changed. His entire world had changed. But one thing had not changed. The memory of his brothers' faces as they ripped his coat from his body and listened to his cries for mercy before turning their backs on him. And now, in the middle of a devastating famine that gripped the entire region, those same brothers stood before him. They didn't recognize him. How could they? The boy they sold into slavery was now the governor of Egypt. They bowed low to the ground, their faces pressed into the dust, fulfilling the very dream Joseph had told them about all those years ago. The dream that made them hate him. The dream where the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed down before him. That dream, the one they mocked and despised, was unfolding right before their eyes, and they had no idea. Joseph's heart must have been pounding. Emotions flooded his mind. Anger, sorrow, longing, confusion. Should he reveal himself immediately? Should he punish them for what they did? Should he send them away and let them starve like they left him to die? The Bible tells us that Joseph recognized them instantly, but he chose to speak harshly to them. He accused them of being spies, sent to find the weak points in Egypt's defenses. They protested, insisting they were honest men, sons of one father from the land of Canaan. And then they said something that pierced Joseph's heart like a dagger. They mentioned their youngest brother, Benjamin, the only other son of Rachel, Joseph's beloved mother who had died giving birth to him. Benjamin, the only full brother Joseph had, the only one who wasn't involved in the plot to destroy him. Was Benjamin still alive? Was he safe? Joseph needed to know. So he devised a test. He would keep one brother as a hostage and send the rest back to Canaan with grain. But they could only return if they brought Benjamin with them. If they truly were honest men, they would come back. If not, well, then he would know the kind of men they still were. The brothers were terrified. They began speaking among themselves in Hebrew, not realizing that Joseph understood every word. And what they said next revealed the guilt they had been carrying for over 2 decades. They said to one another that this calamity had come upon them because of what they did to Joseph. They remembered his cries for mercy. They remembered how they ignored him. Reuben, the eldest, reminded them that he had warned them not to harm the boy. But they wouldn't listen. Now they believed his blood was being required of them. Joseph had to turn away. He couldn't let them see his face because tears were streaming down his cheeks. These were not tears of bitterness or revenge. These were tears of a man who realized that his brothers, despite their terrible sin, had not forgotten what they had done. Their guilt had haunted them, their consciences had not been silent. And now, after all these years, they were finally being confronted with the consequences of their actions. But they still didn't know the whole truth. They didn't know that the man standing before them, the one who held their lives in his hands, was the very brother they had betrayed. Joseph composed himself and turned back to them. He chose Simeon to remain in Egypt as the hostage and ordered the rest to return home with their grain. But here's where Joseph's plan becomes even more brilliant and emotionally complex. Without their knowledge, he commanded his servants to return every man's money to his sack of grain. When the brothers stopped to rest on their journey home and opened their sacks to feed their animals, they discovered the silver. Panic set in. What did this mean? Were they being set up? Would they be accused of theft when they returned? Fear gripped their hearts, and they asked each other a haunting question. What is this that God has done to us? That question reveals something profound. They knew deep in their spirits that something larger than chance was at work. They sensed the hand of divine justice closing in around them. But they had no idea just how close they were to the truth. When they arrived back in Canaan and told their father Jacob everything that had happened, the old man was devastated. He had already lost Joseph. Now Simeon was trapped in Egypt, and the Egyptian ruler demanded that Benjamin be brought to him. Jacob cried out in anguish, declaring that everything was against him. He refused to let Benjamin go. He couldn't bear the thought of losing Rachel's only remaining son, but the famine didn't end. The grain they brought back from Egypt began to run out. Starvation loomed over the household. They had no choice. If they wanted to survive, they would have to return to Egypt, and that meant bringing Benjamin. Judah, the same brother who had suggested selling Joseph into slavery years before, now stepped forward with a desperate plea. He offered himself as a guarantee for Benjamin's safety, promising to bear the blame forever if anything happened to him. Jacob's resistance finally broke under the weight of necessity and Judah's solemn vow. With trembling hands and a heavy heart, he agreed to let Benjamin go. But he didn't send them empty-handed. He instructed his sons to take gifts: balm, honey, spices, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. He also told them to take double the amount of silver, returning what had mysteriously appeared in their sacks and bringing new silver to purchase more grain. Perhaps he thought it had all been an oversight. Perhaps this gesture of honesty would soften the heart of the harsh Egyptian ruler. And so, with Benjamin among them, the brothers made their way back to Egypt, their hearts filled with dread and uncertainty. Just when they arrived and stood before Joseph once again, his eyes immediately found Benjamin, his younger brother, now a grown man, standing there alive and well. Joseph's emotions surged within him, but he maintained his composure. He ordered his steward to bring the men to his house and prepare a feast. But this command only deepened their fear. Why were they being taken to his house? Were they about to be enslaved because of the silver that was returned in their sacks? In desperation, they approached Joseph's steward at the entrance of the house and explained everything: the silver, the discovery, their confusion. They insisted they had brought it all back, plus more. The steward, who was clearly in on Joseph's plan, calmly reassured them, telling them that their God must have put treasure in their sacks, for he had received their payment. Then he brought Simeon out to them. Inside Joseph's house, the brothers were given water to wash their feet and feed for their animals. They prepared their gifts, anxiously waiting for Joseph to arrive at noon. When he entered, they bowed before him once again and presented their offerings. Joseph asked them about their well-being and then posed the question that had been burning in his mind. "Is your father still alive, the old man you spoke of?" They answered that yes, their father was alive and well, and they bowed down again in reverence. Then Joseph's gaze shifted to Benjamin, and he asked if this was their youngest brother. Without waiting for an answer, he pronounced a blessing over him. "God be gracious to you, my son." But Joseph could no longer hold back the flood of emotion. The sight of Benjamin, his only full brother, the son of his beloved mother Rachel, was too much. He hurried out of the room, searching for a private place, and he wept. He wept for the years lost, for the pain endured, for the family torn apart. He washed his face, regained control, and returned to the room, commanding that the meal be served. The Egyptians ate separately, for it was an abomination to them to eat with Hebrews, and Joseph sat alone at his own table. But here's where the tension escalates even further. Joseph arranged his brothers' seating in the exact order of their birth, from the firstborn to the youngest. The brothers looked at one another in astonishment. How could this Egyptian official possibly know their birth order? What kind of knowledge did he possess? Unease rippled through them, but they said nothing. Joseph made sure that Benjamin's portion was 5 times larger than anyone else's. He wanted to see how they would react. Would jealousy rise up again as it had with him all those years ago? Would they resent Benjamin for being favored? But they ate and drank freely, seemingly at ease, showing no signs of the envy that had once consumed them. This was a test, and they were passing it, though they didn't realize they were being tested at all. Joseph's heart must have been filled with conflicting emotions. Hope that his brothers had changed, yet caution born from the wounds of betrayal. This story isn't just about a family reunion. It's about how God can take the darkest chapters of your life and transform them into the very foundation of your purpose. Joseph's suffering wasn't wasted. His pain had meaning. And if you're walking through betrayal, loss, or disappointment right now, remember this. Your story isn't over. God is writing something far greater than you can see. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.